basic principles of international law. They are not controversial at all. And that's one of the peculiarities of the Israel-Palestine conflict. If you look at the actual issues at stake, they are probably the least controversial in international law of any conflict in the world today. The last issue, which I haven't fully discussed, is the question of the right of return. For those of you who are not familiar with it, just briefly, when Israel was founded in 1948, about 750,000 Palestinians at the end of the war found themselves outside their homes. Many live in refugee camps in the West Bank, in Gaza, in Lebanon, in Jordan, and most of you will know the reference to the Palestinian refugees. And what is their legal status under international law? That's the fourth issue: borders, settlements, Jerusalem, refugees. As I already mentioned, every year in the UN General Assembly, the resolution to resolve the conflict includes the principle that the Palestinians have the right to return to their homes and compensation. It's also true, it'll come as a surprise to many of you, all the major human rights organizations have upheld the right of the Palestinians to return to their homes. Human Rights Watch, in 2000, it said, "We urge Israel to recognize the right to return for those Palestinians and their descendants who fled from territory that is now within the state of Israel and who have maintained appropriate links with that territory." Amnesty International, 2001, "We call for Palestinians who fled or were expelled from Israel, the West Bank, or Gaza Strip, along with those of their descendants who have maintained genuine links with the area, to be able to exercise their right of return." And so what you find is, on all the major questions, borders, settlements, Jerusalem, refugees, there's no dispute in the international community. And now that just leaves us with one question. I've gone through the position of all the states in the world, including the Arab states and the Muslim states. It's clear from the record that the only obstacle is Israel and Israel and the United States at the level of states. But what about the Palestinian parties to the conflict? There's no dispute at all, I would underline at all, that the Palestinian Authority, currently represented by Mr. Abbas, that he formally supports the two-state settlement, and that in fact the Palestinian Authority has made major concessions beyond what the international law requires of them. But there is this question of Hamas, which seems to, I don't know, press strange buttons in people. So what is Hamas's actual position? Before I get to it, I would want to make the obvious point that Hamas was only elected into power in January 2006. The Palestine Liberation Organization already, from the mid-1970s, was supporting a two-state settlement on the terms we already went over. So it doesn't seem believable, or it can't be understood, that Hamas is the obstacle to a resolution of the conflict, when Israel had, from the mid-1970s until 2006, which is to say more than 3 decades, it could have resolved the conflict before there was a Hamas, with the Palestine Liberation Organization and then the Palestinian Authority. However, I won't evade the challenge. Let's look at Hamas's record. The United States government recently did a study of Hamas, and this is what it concluded. Hamas has been carefully and consciously adjusting its political program for years and has sent repeated signals that it is ready to begin a process of coexisting with Israel. The head of Hamas's Politburo, Khalid Mishal, in March 2008, he said, most Palestinian forces, including Hamas, accept a state on the 1967 borders. Even after Israel's merciless assault on Gaza, what the Goldstone report called a disproportionate attack designed to punish, humiliate, and terrorize a civilian population. Even after that horrendous Israeli massacre in Gaza, right after, 2 days later, Mr. Michel said, our objective remains the constitution of a Palestinian state with East Jerusalem as its capital, the return of the Israelis to the pre-67 borders, and the right of return of our refugees. That is to say, the UN position, the position of the International Court of Justice. Some people say, what about Hamas's charter? The charter which is filled with, correctly said, anti-Semitic, quite, outrageous statements. But the fact of the matter is, from the mid-1990s, Hamas has rarely, if ever, even referred to its charter. That's not just the position or the view of scholars. It's not just the position or the view of US government agencies. It's also the opinion of Israel's Mossad. That's a fact. In December, just before Israel attacked Gaza, the former head of the Mossad, his name is Ephraim Levy, he said as follows, and let me quote him slowly and carefully. The Hamas leadership has recognized that its ideological goal is not attainable and will not be in the foreseeable future. They are ready and willing to see the establishment of a Palestinian state in the temporary borders of 1967. They know that the moment a Palestinian state is established with their cooperation, they will be obligated to change the rules of the game. They will have to adopt a path that could lead them far from their original ideological goals, which is to say, in simple English, he says, Hamas, it doesn't want to, it doesn't like to, but it recognizes that it has no option apart from a state on the June 67 borders, even if it will force them to give up on their ideological goals. In recent times, Israel, the United States, they say this isn't enough. Palestinians have to go further. They have to accept the legitimacy of Zionism. They have to accept the legitimacy of Israel. They have to accept that Israel is a Jewish state. So Prime Minister Netanyahu, in June 2009, he said, Palestinians, they have to recognize the right of the Jewish people to a state of their own in this land. That is, Palestinians must become Zionists. And in September 2009, he went before the United Nations and he says, Palestinians must finally do what